The autumn wind swept across the rugged Arizona territory, carrying dust through the narrow canyon where two worlds stood facing each other. On one side waited a small group of exhausted settlers, dressed in worn coats and faded dresses. On the other stood Apache warriors, silent and watchful, their expressions impossible to read. Between them stood 22-year-old Clara Whitmore. Her hands trembled beneath the white sleeves of the simple wedding dress that no longer looked like a symbol of joy. It felt more like a promise she had never chosen to make. Just 3 days earlier, she had been hiding in an abandoned church miles away, believing she would spend the rest of her life running from the men who had destroyed her family. Now she was standing before strangers, preparing to marry an Apache warrior she had never spoken to. The marriage was not born of love. It was the desperate price of peace. Months of violence between local ranchers and the Apache had claimed too many lives. Livestock had been stolen, homes had burned, and innocent families had suffered on both sides. Finally, the leaders agreed to an unusual treaty, one that would unite the communities through marriage and prove that peace was stronger than revenge. No one asked Clara whether she agreed. She had simply been told that her future depended on it. The tribal elder raised his hands toward the clear blue sky and spoke in Apache. His deep voice echoed through the canyon while every warrior lowered his head in respect. Clara couldn't understand the words. She only understood the silence that followed. Then she looked at the man standing across from her. Dakota. He was taller than anyone she had ever met, his dark hair tied neatly behind his shoulders. A leather necklace carved from eagle bone rested against his chest, and years of hardship showed in the calm confidence of his face. He didn't smile. He didn't glare. He simply watched her with steady eyes that revealed nothing. Clara lowered her gaze immediately. She had heard stories about Apache warriors since childhood. Some were terrifying. Others were impossible to believe. She didn't know which stories were true anymore. All she knew was that this man was now her husband. The ceremony ended quietly. No music. No celebration. Only a respectful nod between the tribal elder and the settlement leader. The settlers climbed onto their wagons and slowly disappeared down the dusty trail. Clara stood frozen. They had left without looking back. For the first time in her life, she realized she truly had nowhere else to go. Dakota motioned toward the horses waiting nearby. Without speaking, he helped her climb onto one before mounting his own. The ride through the mountains lasted for hours. Neither of them spoke. The afternoon sun slowly disappeared behind towering cliffs as the trail became narrower. Clara's thoughts raced faster than the horses. What would happen now? Would she be accepted? Would she spend the rest of her life among strangers? Or had she simply exchanged one prison for another? As darkness settled across the land, lights from small campfires appeared ahead. The Apache village rested beside a flowing river surrounded by tall cottonwood trees. Children laughed while chasing one another between the lodges. Women prepared food over open fires. Elders shared quiet conversations beneath the evening sky. It wasn't the frightening place Clara had imagined. People looked at her with curiosity rather than hatred. Several children even smiled shyly before hiding behind their mothers. Dakota led her toward a modest lodge built from wooden poles and animal hides. "This is your home," he said softly. It was the first sentence she had heard him speak all day. His English carried a gentle accent but was clear enough to understand. Clara stepped inside. The lodge was simple but warm. Blankets covered the sleeping area. A clay lamp burned quietly near the entrance. Fresh herbs hung from the wooden frame, filling the room with a calming scent. It felt surprisingly peaceful. Dakota remained near the doorway, giving her space. "You may rest," he said. She nodded but couldn't bring herself to sit. Her heart still pounded. She clutched the edges of her wedding dress as though letting go would cause everything to collapse. Dakota noticed. "You are afraid." It wasn't a question. Clara finally looked at him. Shouldn't I be? For a long moment he said nothing. Then he answered quietly. No. The single word surprised her. He wasn't demanding. He wasn't angry. He sounded almost disappointed that she believed she needed to fear him. Dakota picked up a folded blanket and placed it gently on a wooden bench. You will sleep here tonight. I will remain outside. Clara blinked in disbelief. You won't stay? He shook his head. Trust cannot be forced. Those 4 words lingered in the silence between them. As Dakota turned toward the entrance, Clara instinctively reached for the necklace hidden beneath her dress. It was the only thing she had managed to keep from her old life. A small silver locket. The movement lasted only a second. But Dakota saw it. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with recognition. The delicate engraving on the locket was unlike anything carried by ordinary settlers. He had seen that symbol once before, years ago, on the belongings of a family caught in a deadly attack near the frontier. He stopped at the doorway. Without accusation, he asked quietly. Where did you get that necklace? Clara's face turned pale. Her hands immediately covered the locket. Tears filled her eyes. It belonged to my mother. Dakota remained perfectly still. Something wasn't right. The name she had been given during the treaty. The fear in her voice. And now the mysterious silver locket. For the first time that day, he realized the woman standing before him was hiding a truth powerful enough to change both of their lives. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon. Inside the quiet lodge, neither of them knew that before sunrise, the past Clara had fought so desperately to escape would come looking for her. The first rays of sunlight crept through the seams of the lodge, painting thin golden lines across the floor. Clara had barely slept. Every sound outside, the crackling of a fire, the distant neigh of a horse, the laughter of children, had kept her awake, reminding her that she was far from the world she had always known. She sat on the edge of the blanket, still wearing the silver locket beneath her dress. It was the only piece of her past she had refused to surrender. Outside, the Apache village was already alive. Women prepared breakfast over open fires while children carried buckets of water from the nearby river. Hunters checked their horses before riding into the hills. The village moved with quiet purpose, each person knowing exactly where they belonged. Clara wondered if she ever would. A soft knock came from outside the lodge. May I enter? Dakota asked. His voice was calm, almost cautious. You may. He stepped inside carrying a wooden bowl filled with warm corn porridge and a cup of fresh spring water. You have not eaten since yesterday. Clara accepted the bowl with both hands. Thank you. Dakota nodded but remained standing. His attention drifted toward the silver chain that disappeared beneath the collar of her dress. I asked about the necklace last night, he said gently. You did not answer. Clara lowered her eyes. I answered as much as I could. There is more. She remained silent. Dakota didn't press her. Instead, he walked toward the entrance. When you are ready to speak, I will listen. His patience surprised her. Every man she had known in the settlement demanded answers. Dakota offered her time. Hours passed. Clara wandered carefully through the village. Some of the women greeted her politely, though they spoke little English. An elderly woman smiled warmly and handed her a woven basket before showing her how to gather herbs growing along the riverbank. Language separated them. Kindness did not. For the first time in months, Clara felt something unfamiliar. Safety. But peace never lasted long. As the afternoon sun reached its highest point, a young Apache scout galloped into the village. His horse was covered in dust. He shouted urgently in Apache. Within seconds, every warrior turned toward him. Dakota hurried over. The scout pointed toward the southern trail. Through broken English, Dakota understood enough. 3 armed riders, he translated quietly. Searching for a young woman. Clara's face lost all color. Her hands tightened around the basket until herbs spilled onto the ground. Dakota noticed immediately. You know these men. It wasn't a question. She looked toward the distant hills where the riders would soon appear. They found me. Dakota guided her back inside the lodge before anyone else could question her. Once they were alone, silence filled the room. Finally, Clara reached beneath her dress and removed the silver locket. She placed it carefully into Dakota's hand. Open it. Inside was a tiny painted portrait. Not of Clara. A woman with the same blue eyes smiled gently from the miniature painting. My mother, Clara whispered. Dakota studied the portrait before looking back at her. There is writing. On the inside cover, delicate letters had been engraved. For Eleanor and her daughter. Truth is worth more than fear. Dakota frowned. The name is Eleanor. Clara nodded slowly. My real mother. He looked at her carefully. You said your family was the Whitmores. She closed her eyes. They weren't. The word seemed to lift a weight she had carried for years. My real name isn't Clara Whitmore. Dakota remained silent. My name is Clara Bennett. She took a shaky breath. When I was 14, my father discovered that a powerful ranch owner had been stealing land from homesteaders by forging legal documents. Families who refused to leave simply disappeared. Her voice trembled. My father gathered proof. He planned to deliver it to the territorial judge. What happened? They murdered him before he arrived. Tears rolled down her cheeks. My mother hid the documents and told me to run if anyone came. She swallowed hard. They came the next morning. Dakota's expression darkened. I escaped through the back window. She looked down at the floor. A preacher found me wandering alone. He knew the men were still searching, so he gave me a new surname. Whitmore. She nodded. For 8 years I've lived under another family's name. Dakota understood now. The fear. The sleepless nights. The panic when the scout mentioned armed riders. She wasn't running from justice. She had been running from murderers. Do these men know who you are? He asked. I don't know. They know someone survived. And if they discover you found me. She couldn't finish the sentence. Dakota closed the silver locket and returned it to her. You trusted me with the truth. I didn't have another choice. You did. She looked up. You could have kept running. Instead, she had chosen honesty. Outside, the village prepared its defenses. Warriors quietly positioned themselves near the entrance without creating panic among the families. Dakota stepped toward the doorway. I made a promise yesterday. Clara looked at him. I said trust cannot be forced. He rested a hand over his heart. Neither can loyalty. What are you saying? I am saying, Dakota replied firmly, that no one will take you from this village. A lump formed in Clara's throat. No one had ever spoken those words to her before. Not the preacher. Not the settlers. Not the officials who ignored her father's death. Only the man she had feared most. As the sun dipped toward the western mountains, 3 distant riders appeared on the southern trail. They slowed their horses as they spotted the Apache village below. One of them removed a folded paper from his saddlebag. It carried a rough sketch of a young woman's face. The drawing was unmistakable. It was Clara. And they had finally found the place where she was hiding. The 3 riders stopped on a rocky ridge overlooking the Apache village. Evening shadows stretched across the valley as the last rays of sunlight glimmered on their rifles. Clara watched from inside the lodge through a narrow opening in the hide wall. Her heartbeat quickened. "They found me," she whispered. Dakota stood beside the entrance, calm and unshaken. Unlike Clara, he showed no sign of fear. His sharp eyes studied every movement the strangers made. "They are watching," he said quietly. "They will not attack while the sun is still up." "How can you be so sure?" "Because hunters who rush into danger rarely live long." Within minutes, several Apache warriors gathered near the center of the village. They spoke in low voices while elders escorted children toward the safest lodges. No one panicked. Everyone had a purpose. Clara noticed the difference immediately. Back in the settlements, fear often turned neighbors against one another. Here, fear brought people together. Dakota turned toward her. "You will stay here." "I'm tired of hiding." "I know. Running has been my whole life." His expression softened. "And today it ends." Those simple words settled her racing heart. Outside, one of the riders slowly approached the village carrying a white cloth tied to the end of his rifle. He stopped several yards away. "I've come to speak," he shouted. Dakota walked forward alone. The rider looked him up and down before speaking again. "We're searching for a dangerous fugitive." Dakota remained silent. "A young woman. Blonde hair. Blue eyes." He unfolded a weathered piece of paper. "If she's here, hand her over. You'll be paid generously." Dakota glanced at the sketch. It resembled Clara, but only enough for someone who already knew her. He folded the paper and handed it back. "No one here matches your description." The writer frowned. "We know she came this way." Dakota met his gaze without blinking. "You have searched." "Yes. You have your answer." The writer's patience disappeared. "Do you know who you're protecting?" Dakota answered calmly. "I know the difference between a frightened woman and a criminal." For a brief moment, neither man spoke. Finally, the rider turned his horse. "This isn't over." "It rarely is," Dakota replied. The three strangers rode away as darkness settled over the valley. But no one in the village believed they had truly left. That night, the village remained unusually quiet. Extra guards watched the trails while small fires burned along the outer edge of the camp. Inside the lodge, Clara sat near the lamp. "You lied for me." Dakota placed another log onto the fire. "I spoke only what I believed. What if I'm wrong? What if trusting me brings danger to your people?" He looked directly at her. "Every choice carries danger." She lowered her eyes. "I don't want anyone else hurt because of me." Dakota remained silent for a long moment. "When I was 16, he began, soldiers attacked my family's camp." Clara looked up. "My father believed fighting would solve everything." His voice grew quieter. "He was brave." "What happened?" "He died before sunset." The room fell silent. "My mother taught me something after that." He stared into the flames. "Strength is not measured by how many enemies you defeat. It is measured by how many lives you protect." Clara felt tears forming again. "You remind me of her." She blinked in surprise. "Your mother." She carried sorrow without allowing it to become hatred. For the first time since arriving, Clara smiled. It was small. But it was real. Over the following days, life in the village slowly returned to normal. Dakota left each morning with the hunters while Clara stayed behind with the women and elders. She learned how to grind corn into flour. She helped gather medicinal herbs along the river. She stitched torn blankets beside elderly women who patiently showed her each step. Although their languages differed, smiles, laughter, and gestures filled the silence. The children accepted her first. A little girl named Ayana tugged gently on Clara's sleeve one afternoon. "Come. She led Clara to a group of children trying to build tiny toy horses from sticks and leather. Their creations leaned sideways and collapsed. Clara laughed. "I think I can help." Using scraps of cloth from her old dress, she tied the pieces together more securely. Within minutes, the children were racing their handmade horses through the grass, laughing so loudly that even nearby warriors smiled. When Dakota returned from hunting that evening, he paused beside the river. Clara sat surrounded by children listening to one of her stories about stars and distant oceans she had seen as a little girl. The children hung on every word. Ayana noticed Dakota first. "She tells good stories." Dakota nodded. "I can see that." Clara looked up, embarrassed. "I was only trying to keep them entertained." "You did more than that." She tilted her head. "They trust you." The words meant more than she expected. For years she had been treated as an outsider wherever she went. Now, among strangers, she had finally begun to belong. Late that evening, a scout returned unexpectedly. His horse was exhausted. He dismounted quickly and spoke urgently to Dakota. The chief's calm expression slowly disappeared. Clara noticed immediately. "What happened?" Dakota turned toward her. The three riders were only scouts. A chill ran through her. "What do you mean?" "Our scout followed them." "And?" "They joined 12 more armed men." Clara's face turned pale. "They're coming back." Dakota nodded. "Before sunrise." He looked across the village where families quietly prepared for another uncertain night. Then he turned back to Clara. "They are not searching anymore." "What are they coming for?" His answer came in a steady voice. "They're coming to take you by force." Outside, thunder rolled across the distant mountains, and for the first time since the wedding, Clara realized that the greatest test of their trust was about to begin. A gray dawn settled over the mountains, leaving the Apache village wrapped in an uneasy silence. The rain from the night before had washed away the dust, but it could not wash away the fear that lingered in every heart. Warriors stood watch along the ridge while elders tended to the wounded from the brief clash with Mercer's scouts. Clara had barely slept. She stepped outside the lodge, breathing the cool morning air. Across the village, women prepared food for the children as though nothing had happened. Their calmness amazed her. Even with danger approaching, they refused to let fear control their lives. Dakota was speaking with the tribal elders when he noticed Clara. "You should rest," he said. "I've rested enough." He studied her face. "You've made a decision." She nodded. "I can't keep hiding. Every time Mercer comes looking for me, innocent people suffer." Dakota remained silent. "I've kept one final secret," Clara continued. She reached beneath her dress and removed the silver locket. Dakota recognized it immediately. Carefully, Clara pressed a tiny hidden clasp inside the locket. A second compartment opened, revealing a tightly folded piece of oilskin paper. "I've carried this since I was 14. She unfolded it with trembling hands. "My father hid it before he was killed." Dakota accepted the document. It contained property records, payment ledgers, and handwritten notes connecting Silas Mercer to dozens of illegal land seizures. Some names belonged to settlers. Others belonged to Apache families. Dakota's eyes narrowed. "He stole land from everyone." Clara nodded. "He created wars between settlers and the Apache so no one would notice he was taking both their lands." The realization struck Dakota like a blow. Years of hatred. Years of bloodshed. Much of it had been fueled by one greedy man's lies. Before either of them could speak again, a scout rode into the village at full speed. "They're coming." The warning echoed through the valley. Dakota climbed onto a large boulder overlooking the village. More than 15 horsemen emerged from the southern trail. At their front rode Silas Mercer himself. His black coat fluttered behind him as he raised a rifle. "I know she's here," Mercer shouted. "Hand over the girl, and no one else gets hurt." Dakota walked alone toward the edge of the village. "This land is under our protection." Mercer laughed. "You're protecting a liar." Dakota answered firmly. "No. I'm protecting the truth." Mercer's smile faded. He raised his hand. Gunfire erupted. Bullets slammed into trees while Apache warriors answered with rifles and arrows from behind rocks and wagons. Families hurried toward the caves as smoke filled the air. Clara wanted to run to safety. Instead, she saw a frightened little boy frozen in the middle of the village. Without thinking, she sprinted toward him. "Come with me." The child clung to her hand as bullets struck the ground nearby. Dakota saw her and rushed forward, shielding them behind a fallen log. "You should have stayed hidden." "I couldn't leave him." Dakota looked at the terrified child. Neither of them spoke. Together, they guided him safely toward the caves. The battle intensified. Mercer's men pushed deeper into the village, believing numbers alone would win. But the Apache knew every rock, every trail, and every narrow passage through the valley. Warriors surrounded the attackers from both sides. Within minutes, Mercer's advance slowed. Then everything changed. One of Mercer's riders was thrown from his horse during the fighting. As he struggled to stand, a leather satchel burst open. Dozens of folded papers scattered across the muddy ground. An Apache warrior gathered them and carried them to Dakota. Dakota quickly examined the documents. His expression hardened. "Their deeds." Clara stepped closer. Every deed carried Mercer's signature. Many belonged to families who had disappeared years earlier. Others listed Apache hunting grounds that had never been legally sold. Mercer hadn't simply murdered witnesses. He had built his fortune by stealing thousands of acres from anyone too weak to fight back. Clara realized the hidden paper inside her locket was only one piece of a much larger crime. Mercer saw Dakota holding the documents. His face turned pale. "Get those papers," he shouted. He charged forward himself. Dakota met him halfway. The two men struggled in the muddy clearing while the battle raged around them. Mercer swung the butt of his rifle. Dakota blocked the blow and forced the weapon aside. Mercer reached for a revolver. Before he could fire, Clara shouted, "Dakota!" The warning came just in time. Dakota stepped aside as the shot missed its target. He knocked the revolver into the mud and forced Mercer to the ground. Seeing their leader defeated, Mercer's remaining men lost their nerve. Several dropped their weapons. The rest fled toward the mountains. Silence slowly returned. Smoke drifted above the village. The wounded were helped to safety. Dakota stood over Mercer, who glared at Clara with hatred. "You should have died with your family," Mercer hissed. Clara looked back without fear. "No." She held up the documents for everyone to see. The truth survived. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of fear lifting from her shoulders. The battle had ended. But the journey to bring Mercer to justice was only beginning. The morning sun rose slowly over the Arizona mountains, casting golden light across the Apache village. The smoke from the previous day's battle had disappeared, replaced by the sounds of children laughing beside the river and women preparing breakfast. Although several warriors carried bandaged wounds, the village had survived. Silas Mercer sat beneath a cottonwood tree with his hands bound. Two Apache warriors stood nearby, watching him without speaking. Clara looked at the man who had haunted her life for 8 long years. For the first time, he no longer seemed powerful. He looked like an old man whose greed had finally caught up with him. Dakota approached her quietly. "The horses are ready." She nodded. "It is time." The tribal elders had decided that Mercer and the recovered land records would be delivered to the nearest federal marshal. The evidence hidden inside Clara's locket, together with the documents recovered during the battle, was more than enough to expose years of fraud, theft, and murder. The journey to Tucson took 2 days. Dakota, Clara, and 4 Apache warriors escorted the prisoner through mountain trails and open desert. Mercer remained silent for most of the trip, knowing every mile carried him farther from the empire he had built through fear. When they reached the federal courthouse, the marshal carefully examined the evidence. He spread the papers across a large wooden desk. One by one, he compared signatures, land deeds, payment records, and witness statements. Finally, he looked up. "These records explain disappearances we've investigated for years." Clara held her breath. "So, people will finally know the truth?" The marshal nodded. "They will." Mercer tried to deny every accusation, but the evidence was overwhelming. Former employees admitted they had been ordered to forge documents. Ranch hands confessed they had threatened families into abandoning their homes. Within weeks, Mercer's entire operation collapsed. The stolen land was returned whenever possible, and surviving families finally received justice. News of the case spread across the territory. People who had once believed the Apache were responsible for every frontier conflict began to question the stories they had been told. Many discovered that Mercer had deliberately fueled hatred between settlers and native communities to hide his own crimes. The truth changed more than one man's fate. It changed how neighbors looked at one another. Several months later, representatives from nearby settlements visited the Apache village, not with rifles, but with wagons carrying food, tools, seeds, and livestock. They came to rebuild trust. The tribal elders welcomed them cautiously. Old wounds could not disappear overnight. But every conversation became another small step toward peace. Clara watched the meetings with quiet satisfaction. The fear that had once lived in her heart had slowly been replaced by hope. One afternoon, she walked beside the river where she had first gathered herbs with the village women. Children raced along the shoreline, laughing as they skipped stones across the water. Little Ayana ran toward her. "You promised another story." Clara laughed. "I remember." Soon a circle of children surrounded her beneath the shade of a large cottonwood tree. Dakota watched from a distance. An elderly woman stepped beside him. "You were right about her." Dakota smiled. "No." The elder raised an eyebrow. "I was wrong." "How?" "I thought I was protecting a stranger." He looked toward Clara as the children listened to another of her stories. "I was protecting my future." As autumn returned to the valley, the tribal elders gathered once more. This time, there was no treaty to negotiate. No fear. No demands. Only gratitude. The oldest elder stood before the village. "Peace is not created by signatures," he said. "It is created by people who choose truth instead of fear." Everyone turned toward Clara and Dakota. The elder smiled warmly. "You both made that choice." Dakota reached for Clara's hand. Unlike the day of their arranged wedding, she did not hesitate. She placed her hand in his willingly. The villagers smiled as the two stood together beneath the evening sky. Their marriage had begun as an agreement between two divided worlds. It had become something far greater. Built on trust. Strengthened by sacrifice. And sealed by love freely given. Years later, travelers crossing the Arizona territory often stopped near the peaceful village beside the river. They heard stories of an Apache leader who had refused to surrender an innocent woman. They heard of a brave woman who had carried the truth for nearly a decade before finding the courage to reveal it. Most importantly, they heard how honesty and compassion had ended a cycle of hatred that violence never could. Whenever visitors asked Clara what had changed her life the most, she never mentioned the battle, the court case, or the hidden documents. Instead, she smiled and remembered one quiet evening inside a small lodge, when a man she barely knew chose kindness over suspicion. For simple words had changed everything. Trust cannot be forced. Those words became the foundation of a family, a friendship between two peoples, and a future neither of them had imagined on the day they first met. And beneath the endless Arizona sky, where fear had once ruled, hope finally found a home. The end.